Let's begin. Number 9. The human flambe. Imagine you're a king. You've lived a life full of backstabbing, political maneuvering, and generally being what historians gently call the bad. Now in your old age, you're sick. Your body is failing, your limbs are basically decorative, and you can't move. So you call in the royal physician, who, operating on the cutting edge of 14th century medical science, comes up with a brilliant idea. His prescription? Get the king drunk. Not by drinking, of course. No, his plan is to wrap your entire paralyzed body, from neck to toe, in linen sheets absolutely drenched in brandy. Then, to really lock in all that medicinal goodness, he has a servant sew you into the boozy cocoon. This was the reality for Charles II of Navarre. After a lifetime of earning the nickname Charles the Bad, his final moments in 1387 were a masterclass in cosmic irony. A servant, having meticulously sewn the king into his flammable mummy bag, needed to snip the final thread. But it's dark, scissors are probably across the room, and who has time for that? So she does the logical thing and pulls out a candle to just burn the tiny thread off. What happens next is a scene straight out of a cartoon, if that cartoon was directed by a pyromaniac. The single flame touched the thread, which touched the brandy-soaked linen, and Charles the Bad instantly became Charles the Human Torch. The alcohol-fueled blaze engulfed him in a flash. The servant, realizing she had just turned the king into a screaming, writhing piece of human kindling, did what any of us would do. She panicked and fled the room. Charles, trapped and paralyzed inside his personal inferno, could do nothing but burn alive. It was a slow, agonizing end, cooked to death by the very thing meant to cure him. Basically, his doctor prescribed the world's most aggressive hot toddy, and the universe decided to light the garnish. Being a king in medieval England was basically a high-stakes game of musical chairs, where the losers don't just get eliminated, they get creatively eliminated. King Edward II learned this the hard way. His reign was a mess from the start. He wasn't great at the whole ruling thing, mostly because he was more interested in hanging out with his favorites than, running a country. This did not sit well with the other powerful nobles, who saw their influence and money getting siphoned off. To make matters worse, he lost a war to Scotland and a famine swept the land. It was the perfect storm of incompetence and bad luck. Eventually, everyone had enough, including his own wife, Isabella of France. She teamed up with an exiled noble, Roger Mortimer, invaded her own husband's kingdom, and won. Edward was captured and in 1327 thrown into a castle. But here's the problem with imprisoning a king. People might try to break him out. His captors realized that as long as Edward was alive, he was a problem, so they decided on a permanent solution. But you can't just stab a king. That leaves messy evidence, and you need a bit of plausible deniability. The solution they allegedly came up with is the stuff of nightmares. According to the stories, the assassins wanted to leave no marks on the outside of his body. So they pinned him down, and while some accounts mention a horn or a tube, the endpoint was the same. They shoved a red-hot iron poker deep inside his, let's just say it was inserted where the sun doesn't shine. He was reportedly killed by being burned from the inside out, a method so horrific his screams were said to have been heard for miles around the castle. It's a death designed not just to kill, but to humiliate, a final brutal message about who was now in charge. Your reign is over, and we're making sure your exit is as painful and degrading as physically possible. Number 7, the Byzantine piñata. So you're an emperor and you've got a brilliant plan to fix your crumbling empire. Step 1, crush the corrupt aristocrats. Step 2, reform the tax system to help the common folk. Step 3, hand out government jobs based on merit, not money. For a brief shining moment, you are the people's champion. The problem is, you get a little too into the whole crushing your enemies thing. Soon, anyone who even looks at you funny is being publicly shamed, mutilated, or just straight up executed. Then your empire gets invaded, you lose a major city, and suddenly the people you were helping decide they've had enough of your brand of paranoid tyranny. This was the spiral of Andronikos of Komnenos, the Byzantine emperor whose approval rating went from hero to zero in record time. When the mob finally turned on him, he tried to escape but was caught and handed over to the very citizens he once ruled. What followed wasn't an execution. It was a 3-day festival of human suffering. This wasn't a quick beheading. The people of Constantinople decided to get creative. First, they chopped off his right hand. Then they pulled out his teeth and ripped out his hair. Someone gouged out one of his eyes. Just for good measure, they threw boiling water on his face. All the while, he was paraded through the streets, being beaten and pelted with anything people could find. The grand finale took place at the Hippodrome. They hung him upside down by his feet between 2 pillars, and soldiers took turns seeing who could hack the deepest into his flesh. He was literally ripped apart by the crowd, and some accounts say he was conscious through most of it. His remains were left to rot in public for years. It's a grim reminder that when the people love you, it's great. But when they stop, they really stop. Number 6. The Imperial Footstool, Rome. The single greatest empire the world had ever seen. A military machine that crushed kingdoms and civilized continents. You rise through the ranks to become its ultimate leader, the emperor. You are, for all intents and purposes, the most powerful man on the planet. So, what's the absolute worst thing that could happen? How about being the first emperor in Roman history to be captured alive by the enemy? And then, just to add insult to injury, being turned into a piece of human furniture. Meet Emperor Valerian. His reign was during the crisis of the 3rd century, which is a polite way of saying the empire was having a full-blown panic attack. While dealing with Gothic invaders, Valerian got blindsided by the assassinated Persians. A plague ripped through his army, weakening it to the point of collapse. In the ensuing battle in 260 AD, he was captured by the Persian king Shapur I, and Shapur decided to make an example out of him. The stories that trickled out of Persia were designed to horrify and humiliate Rome. According to the accounts, Shapur I didn't just lock Valerian in a cell. He used the former emperor as a human stepstool, placing his boot on Valerian's back every single time he mounted his horse. Imagine the sheer degradation. For years, the most powerful man in the world was reduced to a footrest. When Valerian, old and broken, tried to offer a ransom for his freedom, Shapur allegedly took things a step further. The legend says he had Valerian executed by forcing him to swallow molten gold. But he wasn't done. He then had Valerian's skin flayed from his body, stuffed it with straw like a taxidermy project, and mounted the gruesome trophy in a temple as a permanent reminder of Persia's victory. It was psychological warfare at its most brutal. The message was clear: not even an emperor is safe. Number 5. The posthumous promotion to fish food. Dying is usually the end of your problems. Sure, your legacy might get debated, but at least you don't have to show up for it. Unless you're Pope Formosus. He had the unique displeasure of being so hated that even death in April 896 AD couldn't get him out of a court date. About 9 months after he died and was buried, in January of 897 AD, the new Pope, Stephen VI, decided he had some unresolved issues with his predecessor. So he did the only logical thing. He had Formosus's rotting corpse dug up, dressed in full papal vestments, and propped up on a throne to stand trial. This wasn't a joke. It was a full-blown state event known as the Cadaver Synod. The corpse of Formosus was formally charged with crimes like perjury and ascending to the papacy illegally. With a deacon appointed to speak for the silent, decaying defendant, the trial proceeded. Unsurprisingly, the verdict was guilty. The punishment? First, they posthumously nullified all of his acts and ordinations. Then, they took his corpse, stripped it of its holy robes, and hacked off the 3 fingers he had used for blessings. The final act of this grotesque theater was to drag his mutilated body through the streets of Rome and dump it unceremoniously into the Tiber River. His crime was essentially political maneuvering, but his punishment was something out of a horror story. He was a pope who got excommunicated, mutilated, and turned into fish food nearly a year after he was already dead. It's a good reminder that in the high-stakes world of papal politics, rest in peace is more of a suggestion than a guarantee. Number 4, the royal burrito. Let's say you're the Caliph of Baghdad, the leader of one of the most magnificent cities on earth. A new threat appears on the horizon, the Mongols. They're a rumor, a boogeyman from the east. You figure they're just another band of raiders. You don't recruit more soldiers, you don't reinforce the walls, you basically just shrug. Then, one day, you look out your window and see an army so vast it blots out the horizon, and their leader, Hulagu Khan, has a very particular set of rules. One of them is a deep, spiritual belief that it's bad luck to spill royal blood directly onto the earth. This is not good news for you. This was the fatal miscalculation of Al-Musta'sim, the last Abbasid Caliph. When the Mongols arrived, they didn't just knock on the gates. They built siege engines, flooded the ground behind the army, and shattered the city's defenses in under 2 weeks. Al-Musta'sim surrendered, hoping for mercy. He did not get it. For a full week, he was forced to watch as the city of Baghdad, a jewel of the Islamic world, was systematically annihilated. Hundreds of thousands of his people were slaughtered. Mosques, palaces, and the Grand Library, containing countless, irreplaceable works of science and philosophy, were burned to the ground. The Tigris River was said to run red with the blood of the dead and black with the ink of dissolved books. Only after being made to witness the complete ruin of his legacy did the Mongols turn their attention to Al-Musta'sim himself. Honoring their tradition, they ensured his royal blood would not touch the ground. They achieved this by rolling him up tightly in a carpet, like a piece of meat in a wrap, and having their horses trample him to death. He was crushed into oblivion, a final, dusty footnote to the utter destruction of his world. Number 3, the three-strike beheading. An execution is supposed to be a somber, efficient affair, especially a royal one. There's a scaffold, a priest, a stoic final prayer, and a single clean strike of the axe. It's a grim piece of political theater. But what happens when the star of the show, the executioner, gets stage fright? What happens when the grand finale goes horribly, horribly wrong? For Mary, Queen of Scots, her final moments were not a swift end, but a bloody, clumsy butchering in front of a horrified audience. After nearly 2 decades of imprisonment in England, Mary was found guilty of plotting to assassinate her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. In 1587, the sentence was death. She walked to the scaffold with all the dignity she could muster, knelt down, and placed her head on the block. The executioner raised his axe. This was it. The first swing missed her neck entirely, burying itself in the back of her head. She reportedly let out a pained groan. The crowd gasped. The executioner, now panicked, yanked the axe free and swung again. This time he hit the neck, but didn't cut all the way through, leaving her head attached by a single stubborn sinew. At this point, the whole event had devolved from a state execution into a gruesome hack job. With a final, frantic chop, the executioner sawed through the remaining bit of flesh and severed the head. As if things weren't undignified enough, he grabbed the head by the hair to show it to the crowd, shouting, "God save the Queen!" But he was left holding only a wig as Mary's head with its short gray hair dropped and rolled across the stage. It was a horrifying trifecta of failure, a botched execution, a shocking reveal, and the ultimate loss of royal composure. Number 2, killed by the cure. Sometimes your end doesn't come at the hands of an invading army or a shadowy assassin. Sometimes the call is coming from inside the house. Or, more specifically, from the team of highly paid medical professionals standing around your bed with a jar of leeches and a bottle of poison, all smiling and telling you this is for your own good. When King Charles II of England collapsed from a seizure in 1685, he wasn't just fighting a stroke, he was fighting a 4-day-long assault from his own royal doctors. The 17th century medical playbook was less about healing and more about aggressively bullying the sickness out of a person. First, they drained a pint of blood from his arm, leaving him weaker. When that didn't work, they did it again from his shoulder. Still no good. So they started getting creative. They forced him to drink emetics and purgatives, violently purging his body from both ends until he was severely dehydrated. They shaved his head and applied blistering agents to his scalp to draw out the illness, which really just meant giving him painful chemical burns. But they were just getting warmed up. They blew sneezing powder up his nose, gave him doses of mercury, a literal neurotoxin, and performed cupping, where heated glass cups were used to create suction on his skin, leaving him covered in massive dark bruises. For 4 straight days, his body was a science experiment for every horrifying theory they had. He was bled, blistered, burned, poisoned, and purged by the very men trying to save him. By the end, he was so broken down by the cures that his actual illness was almost a side note. He died not just from a stroke, but from the full, agonizing force of 17th century medical expertise. There are dignified ways to die in battle. You can go down swinging, a sword in your hand, earning your place in the sagas. It's the kind of death they write songs about. Then there are other ways. Ways that don't make it into the epic poems. Ways that get whispered about centuries later with a bit of a grim chuckle. King Edmund II, a man nicknamed Ironside for his legendary toughness and valor in fighting off Viking invaders, met an end so undignified it sounds like a joke. After a brutal war, Edmund was forced into a treaty with the Danish king Knut, splitting England between them. The deal had a spicy little clause. Whichever king died first, the other would inherit the whole kingdom. A few weeks later, wouldn't you know it, Edmund Ironside was found dead. The official cause is a mystery, but the story that circulated was an absolute masterpiece of humiliation. According to the legend, Edmund was assassinated while using the privy. That is, sitting on the toilet. The story goes that an assassin, hired by one of Edmund's rivals, hid in the cesspit beneath the royal latrine. As the king sat down to do his business, the killer thrust a dagger, or in some versions, fired a crossbow bolt straight up from below, fatally wounding him in the most private and vulnerable of positions. Can you imagine the sheer ignominy? To be a warrior king known as Ironside, a man who fought Vikings to a standstill, only to be taken out mid-poop by a guy hiding in your own sewage. While most historians now doubt this story, the fact that it was told at all shows just how brutal medieval propaganda could be. It's the ultimate power move, not just killing your enemy, but making his death a literal potty joke for the rest of time. Number 3, the Scourge of God's Snot Rocket. Your name is Attila the Hun, the Scourge of God. Roman emperors tremble at your name. You have carved out a vast empire through brutality and conquest, leaving a trail of fire and terror from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. You are the ultimate warrior, embodying savage power, a living nightmare for the civilized world. So when your end comes, it must be epic, right? A final glorious battle against a dozen legions? A dramatic assassination by a desperate king? At the very least, a poisoned goblet of wine from a treacherous bride? Nope, you die from a nosebleed. After a long and successful career of terrifying everyone, Attila decided to take yet another wife. On his wedding night in 453 AD, he did what any all-powerful warlord would do. He partied hard. He feasted, he drank himself into a stupor, and eventually passed out flat on his back. Sometime during the night, a blood vessel in his nose burst. It happens. But because he was blackout drunk and lying on his back, the blood didn't drip out. Instead, it flowed down the back of his throat. He didn't wake up. He didn't even stir. The most feared man in the world drowned in a pool of his own blood and mucus while sleeping off a hangover. His guards found him the next morning, dead in his bed next to his terrified new bride, having met his end not with a bang, but with a gurgle. It's perhaps the most anticlimactic death in all of history. The scourge of God was defeated by a bad case of epistaxis. Number 11. The Gladiator's Last Bath. If there was ever an emperor who had it coming, it was Commodus. Imagine the most narcissistic, egomaniacal celebrity you can think of, then give them absolute power over the Roman Empire. That was Commodus. He wasn't interested in ruling, he was interested in his own myth. He dressed up as Hercules, complete with a lion skin and club, and forced the Senate to declare him a living god. His real passion, though, was fighting as a gladiator in the Colosseum, a massive taboo for an emperor. Of course, the fights were always rigged. He'd face off against terrified amateurs or wounded animals, and then declare himself the greatest warrior in history. He even renamed Rome after himself, calling it Colonia Commodiana. This level of delusion was bound to have consequences. His inner circle watched with growing horror as he became more unhinged, burning parts of the city just to rebuild them in his own honor. The breaking point came when his mistress, Marcia, found a list of people he planned to execute. Her name was on it, along with the names of his most powerful officials. They realized it was either him or them, so they hatched a plan. Marcia poisoned his wine and Commodus drank it down. For a moment it looked like it was over, but the emperor, having spent the day in a drunken stupor, simply vomited the poison right back up. He was sick, but he was alive. Panicked, the conspirators moved to Plan B. They sent his personal wrestling partner, a man named Narcissus, into the bathhouse where Commodus was recovering. The emperor, weakened and confused, was no match for the professional athlete, who promptly strangled him to death in the bath. The god emperor, the self-proclaimed Hercules, the greatest gladiator in history, died not in a blaze of glory, but naked, poisoned, and choked out by his own gym buddy. So yeah, maybe being born royal isn't all it's cracked up to be. Subscribe for more proof that history was basically a horror movie.